Welcome, everybody, to the first module on contextual intelligence. I'm going to share my screen here and jump right into this. So, contextual intelligence, Leonard Sweet and I call this the ancient secret to mission on the front lines. And in this first module, we're going to look at, we're just going to do some orientation and kind of introduce contextual intelligence and what it actually is. We just had a recent event, for some of us, recent event that was kind of a global black swan or a disruptive situation. It seemed to like come out of nowhere, changed reality as we know it, at least for a time. Some people still dealing with the changes that the COVID-19 crisis caused, the pandemic. And what we saw happen during that was very quickly. Things changed rapidly. People were open to innovation, streaming services, changing the way that we do things in church. Some people, anyway, others were resistant to any of that. But um, we saw massive, like revolutionary change because the context, situation in the world dictated how we could function, how we could live, how we could even breathe or enter into a space. And believe it or not, there were people predicting that that pandemic would happen. There were people who were ahead of that, knowing that that was coming. And there were some churches and some ministries and some organizations that were in a better position during that than others because they had what they were reading the signs of the times and knowing what to do, which comes from the tribe of Issachar, which we're going to dive into in the next module, the biblical and theological roots of contextual intelligence. But some would say the first task of a leader or a community of leaders, I'm really into like a shared leadership model where that's distributed among a group of people, but is for us to kind of paint a picture of reality, right? To move, to lead, to act, to be in ministry, we have to understand the world around us, how it functions. We have to be able to do kind of semiotic analysis. We're going to get deeper into this, but that's to be able to understand the meaning systems in the world, the signs and symbols of communication that people use, to understand what's good news, what's bad news, how are people communicating, what are the mediums of communication, those kind of things. We have to be able to assess that and then function faithfully within it. So contextual intelligence is a way to do that. So let me give you an example. 2005, here is the Pope getting ready to come out and give the inaugural address of that year. As you look out over that crowd, how many phones can you count? So just take a moment, look out, have soft eyes with me for a minute, see what you notice. Now you can notice a couple phones right there in the front, right? There's one gentleman there with a flip phone. No, not throwing any shade if you still have a flip phone. Flip phones are actually making a comeback these days. So how many phones do you count? Okay, so maybe you see a couple there, handful out in the crowd. Now let's jump forward just 8 years, same situation, people waiting for the Pope to give out the annual opening kind of address. So they're gathered. Now, how many phones can you count? Right? So think of in the space of that time, the revolution of smart computers that fit in our pockets, right? Digital connectivity. We're walking around with this very powerful device that shapes not just how we think and communicate and live, how we find jobs, how we fall in love, how we work, all of that. It actually really even rewires the brain and in some negative ways for like addiction and such, right? So this is a major adaptation, a major shift in our context, and the church has sought to adapt to that. Another thing we can think about in our time that is a big contextual kind of variation that's happening is just this decline in affiliation of the church. Yes, we all know the numbers, the nuns, the dones. There's some more recent data saying that might be temporarily stabilizing for the first time in a while, but we've just seen this total disaffiliation from people from organized religion, but not just organized religion, but institutions, organizations, civic clubs, right? So there's a book by Robert Putnam called Bowling Alone, sociologist, political scientist, who looked at this, right? And not just that people are not going to church, but they're not bowling in leagues anymore. They're not participating in groups, teams, doing things that people used to do together, but we're doing those things alone, right? So there's this loss of social capital in society. There's this loss of connectivity. That's all led to the epidemic of loneliness and isolation that our Surgeon General Vivek Murthy wrote about a couple years back, right? So there's this post-institutional decline. There's this people disaffiliating from organizations, institutions in general. But then there's this really fascinating trend, almost this counter trend, that there's a rise in spirituality. So you've seen the Barna studies and things coming out from Pew Research, the open generation, right? So these emerging age cohorts are spiritually open, really fascinated, trying to connect with a higher power, knowing there's got to be something out there, but not finding that in institutional organized religion, right? So that's a way to think about our context and some big shifts that if we're not aware of those things and we just keep doing business as usual, it's not going to be good for us, right? 20% of people, you all have heard me say this before, if you've been in anything that I've taught, right? About 20% of people attend church. About 20% of people say they attend church, but actually lie about their church attendance. There's about 40%, usually more than that in some places. They're just not going to come to church. They're working. There's no more blue laws. They're got youth soccer leagues. Their kids are in sports stuff. They're just the only day they have off might be, a Sunday. So they're certainly not going to go to church. So here we are. A lot of churches are still programming for the Sunday only kind of thing, right? Knowing that half the population is just not connecting with that. All that together, if you think about it, for those of us that are in ministry, it's like we've experienced a change of ecosystems. So the churches we know is kind of formed in a rainforest, and we know how to move in that space, and we know how to live in that ecosystem. But now we find ourselves in a desert. A desert is also an ecosystem, just a very different ecosystem. And so now we got to figure out how to get water out of a cactus and get splinters in our hands. And how do we find the oases of the spirit in this place? So this is not a technical problem, technical solution scenario. This is an adaptive challenge. And we need adaptive leadership. We need an adaptive ecclesiology. But there's a certain skill that helps us understand those contextual variations, adapt, and to faithfully operate in the new ecosystem, and that's contextual intelligence. It's almost like we've been perfectly prepared for a world that no longer exists, right? I hear a lot of my former students who graduated and go out into the world and they're in ministry now, and they say, seminary didn't teach me any of the things that I have to do on a daily basis in ministry. For example, I assumed I was going to be sent or hired or called to churches that actually had people in them, right? And that's not a given these days. You have to be just as much a missionary as you are a pastor because most churches, people are just not there. You have to figure out how to reach new people. But all of our training and it's like we're still living in the jungle, rainforest, and we're living in a desert. And there's a way to kind of distinguish that in a contextual intelligence framework where there's a difference between kind learning environments and wicked learning environments. So in a kind learning environment, patterns repeat consistently, there's feedback, it's accurate and rapid usually. So in a kind learning environment, you need deliberative practice, pattern recognition, narrow repetitive experience, specialists, specializations in all these different areas, right, to achieve mastery. So kind learning environments, think of like playing chess. There's rules to the game. When you make a move, you get feedback. There's a structure to it, playing golf or tennis, pickleball, whatever these days. There's rules, there's feedback, there's deliberative practice is how you master it. But wicked learning environments, none of that can hold true, right? So repetitive patterns, rules of the game are unclear. The status quo seems to be changing all the time and adapting. Feedback is delayed or inaccurate or both. So in a wicked learning environment, you need a range of skills. You need to apply knowledge from different fields to pursue creative possibilities in the space. You need to be able to adapt. So not rigid, repetitive, know how to play the one game, but adapt to whatever's happening. And that means outside experience is needed for mastery, learning from other fields, not just being a specialist in your one field, right? So interdisciplinary research and all those things that we see happening in academia. So it's almost like in a wicked and learn environment, we're playing alien tennis, right? We don't know this game. We've never played it before. We don't know who we're playing against. We don't know how many balls are on the court, right? A more fitting example here, maybe pickleball, right? That that's a huge kind of craze today, one of the fastest growing sports. So we're playing alien pickleball. We don't know who we're playing with. We don't know how to play the game. This is more kind of where we find ourselves in this time. Some other notable things of our contextual reality is generations involved in church, the 65 builder generation, and then every generation that kind of cuts in half. There's 10% of Christian 20 somethings that have a resilient faith, very few. Two and three, 19, 18 to 29-year-olds leave the church once they come of age. We saw for the first time we're no longer in a primarily religious culture, so less for the first time since Gallup poll's been doing this in 2021, we saw less people actually affiliating with a religious group. Good news is it's not about disinterest in spirituality or disconnect from God or belief in God or willingness to believe in God, but it's just pushing against the institutional things. There's about 58% of young people, this comes from the Springtide research, they don't want to be told answers about their faith and religion. They want to discover their own answers. A non-contextually intelligent response to that is to just keep doing monologue sermons and answering questions that people aren't really asking, right? The time of the monologue sermon is over in many contexts. The time of the dialogue, the dialogical preaching and sermonic conversations has come because people want to ask questions. They don't want to be indoctrinated, told, believe like this. They want to say, hey, I got some questions about Jesus, right? So a contextually intelligent adaptation is to proclaim Jesus, right? But now to take on more of a kind of a dialogical approach. 55% of young people don't go to churches because they feel they're going to be judged in those gatherings or they can't bring their whole selves. Faith unbundled is this thing that's happening in our world today where we're unbundling faith, where we're separating out religious beliefs and practices and community. This research says the hallmarks of engaging young people are going to be curiosity, wholeness, connection, and flexibility. A lot of our institutional religious systems don't do well with these. We're not the curiosity people. We're the, hey, we got the answers, just ask us people. We're not proclaiming a gospel of wholeness. We're proclaiming a gospel of post-mortem escape hatch from hell to get to heaven. We're not really offering people connection. You come and sit in a pew, orient to the front, listen to the sermon, sing the songs, go back to life. There's no space to ask questions or wrestle or say, hey, I'm struggling this week with this. There, you just don't feel any more connected than if you went to anything else, right? So people just kind of check out on the church. And then flexibility is the ability to adapt and to say, maybe we need to change the way we do this thing that we've done for 300 years the same way. An unbundled faith kind of person to really think about this, to put some flesh on it, is Lady Gaga. So Lady Gaga, she was raised a practicing Catholic. She worships. They actually have a time of prayer before she does a performance. She also schedules tour dates based on astrological charts. And then she said things reportedly like, "I hope I'm teaching people to worship themselves." So that should be a cause for like, whoa, wait a minute, worship themselves, right? Because we should worship God. we should teach people that they're beloved and made in the image of God and that they have sacred value and great worth. We need to affirm the goodness that's in every person made in the image of a good God in a good world. But worshiping ourselves, probably not something that we should do. But that's what happens when you kind of have this faith unbundled situation where you can have beliefs and maybe or maybe they're a connected community or not, or these religious practices that may not be grounded in a community. So I'll take, Buddhist mindfulness meditation over here, a little bit of scripture, Lectio Divina stuff over here, but the element of community, it cannot be missing, where the community that's rooted in the faith and tethered to and connected to and relationship with the one holy Catholic Apostolic Church. When you don't have that, you get a lot of potential for really weird stuff like cults. And there's a lot of those today, right? Just go on any streaming platform and lots of cults happening, right? This is like a new one every week because these things have lost that communal element and that connection. So what we do with a thing like fresh expression, which is a contextual based form of church. So we let the context lead what kind of church and practice and community forms, as we're saying, hey, we know people are already connecting all these, what sociologists would call domains of life around these different shared practices, hobbies, interests like social justice or media and storytelling or health and well-being or you name it. So what we're doing with that is we're saying let's go out into the context, listen, learn, build relationships, explore what spirituality might look like in the context, and little contextual forms of church kind of spring up out of that is basically the approach. There's a whole thing, the innovator's dilemma and the 60-40 problem. This happens in the corporate world too, right? Where maybe you have 40% of the market, 60% you don't have, right? So your existing customer base is 40%. And often corporations kind of compete for the same customers in a market, right? In the blood red waters of the 40%. There's this big blue ocean out there, the 60% of people that are currently not reached by a service or a product or whatever. And so organization has to make a choice. Do we double down, try to care for the 40 and create products or services that are going to attract more of that customer base? Or do we go out into the blue ocean and try new things, new services, new products? And this is really where a lot of churches find themselves, maybe unwittingly. Do we double down and care for the ones we already have in the way that they're accustomed to experiencing church, or do we move out into the blue ocean? With fresh expressions, we're kind of flip the innovator's dilemma and say, no, we actually need to do both. We need to do both and equally. Um, the neighborhood society, this maybe some of you grew up with Mr. Rogers, right? This is one of the saints of my generation. And grew up, in the neighborhood where you cared for one another. And there's this kind of vision of a neighborhood where we loved each other, washed each other's feet, and all of that. And it was a beautiful day in the neighborhood. The neighborhood world that's based in locality, based in like you are born and live in the same zip code probably your whole life, has shifted to what Manuel Castells has called a network society. And that is a social system connected by flows of technology where people gather in nodes and hubs, digitally based, distributed, and not committed to place. So think of like Neo's Matrix world, which is kind of prophetic in a sense. There's like these two worlds. There's the world, you plug in, jack in, you go through this simulation, and then there's the flesh and blood, like real world, down in the caves and whatnot. And they're kind of living between these two worlds. The network society is a little bit like that, right? There's this digital, technological, globalized world, and then there's these physical, place-based kind of things, and you can access that network just by kind of taking out your screen or putting on your, meta glasses or whatever, and you're just plugged in this whole other reality. The network society is powered by these microelectronic based information communication technologies. So again, those things shape how we work, how we fall in love, how we do all of those things, and how we even think. Now we have AI basically that can actually think for you and can do most of the tasks that humans have done for in the industrial society and the neighborhood society. So all that shifted now, right? We're in this kind of this whole new world. One of the challenging things about contextual intelligence, Robert Service reminds us that our cultures are more like cloud formations than clocks. So you never really know a context. You never really know a culture. If you think about a cloud formation, as soon as you have an accurate picture of it in your mind, right, the atmospheric conditions change, right? The weather patterns and such. And the cloud formation is always changing, right? So a clock, it moves, it's got a rhythm, you know where it's going, it's mechanical, think industrial society, industrial age. Now, where the but cultures and contexts are these webs of relationships that are always changing, and so we have to constantly be kind of using some kind of thinking framework that helps us understand how those changes are happening. So, how do we really grow in our ability to read our context to intentionally engage our communities for Christ? This is really the question that led us to this discovery of contextual intelligence and to kind of flesh it out theologically, biblically, historically. And contextual intelligence, the words themselves, the etymology of this comes from the Latin. So to weave together something, right? And then to the between or the legere, to choose or read, to weave together, to read, um, or accurately reading between the lines. The threads that intertwine to form a context, contextual intelligence, the ability to see those threads, how everything's interconnected, to read between the lines using insight, hindsight, foresight, which we're going to get into later in another module. But when you think about IQ, this is probably what comes to mind for many of us. It's a measurement used to express the apparent relative intelligence of a person. IQ tests are prolific and have been for a long time. Um, there's been a lot of skepticism around, do IQ tests really measure IQ, or do they measure the ability to take a test and get right answers on a test? But it's one of the prevailing ways that we think of intelligent people have these scores that we can kind of measure and quantify with our current metric systems, and these indicators show intelligence. It's interesting though, if you go back in history and look at a show like the Quiz Kids, we had these really intelligent children that were very high on IQ. And then you followed them, and this is true of like child stars and all kind of, and they didn't actually have success in life, many of them, even though they were highly intelligent, genius IQ, right? But then they go on in life to completely fail in different things or to become, many got wrapped up in drug addiction and things like that. So you can have intelligence, right? But that doesn't necessarily always translate to real world success or effectiveness, or for Christians, like faithfulness and fruitfulness in Christ. Robert Sternberg, who is a psychologist, and a lot of sociologists engage his work as well, but he popularized the term contextual intelligence. And his contention is that any intelligence has to take place in an actual context. A behavior that's contextually intelligent in one context may not be so wise in another context, right? So the context determines how we think and behave and are successful in different situations. He actually came out with another study in later books on successful intelligence. And he's also one of the thought leaders in the area of like wisdom research. But think about this, like there's things that if you do it in one space, right, that are not very smart to do in another space. I'm sure you have some examples you can think of. Alan Hirsch says that, contextual intelligence is we're looking to find those threads of meaning and of God's will in the seeming or apparent chaos of our current experience. The ability to read that, to find those threads, to discern, to make accurate decisions about what to do. This all for my doctoral research. One of the people that some of the folks I really dug into their work was Mayo and Nahira. These are two Harvard guys, and they did an exhaustive study on what they called the canon of business legends over the last 100 years, and discovered these are people who are all really successful in whatever they did. They looked at managers, they looked at entrepreneurs, they looked at CEOs, creators, innovators, and they said the thing that was the distinguishing thing about them, it wasn't their IQ, it wasn't their like leadership ability or how they led or any of that, um, but it was their contextual intelligence. That this understanding that springs forth from one's situation in the world and awareness of that, how to make sense of one's time and to seize opportunities. I'll look at a couple just examples of that to close our time. But so there's two key terms here that I want to kind of put together in ministry, right? We're in a place of leadership, or I think more importantly, followership. I'm not a fan of the leadership culture, the leadership cult, and applying all these business leadership practices to the church world. And you got your divine CEO. I'm against that. I'm talking about leadership in the biblical Jesus followership kind of way. We're all following Jesus, and by our very nature of following Jesus, other people, if we're following Jesus well, kind of come alongside us and follow Jesus with us, right? So leadership is energizing a community of people toward some mission, right? A shared mission, doing that together. And I'm a proponent of shared leadership, less composer on a platform, directing the orchestra, more jazz band. Let's sit down, spark off a note, and everybody plays their part. But contextual intelligence, that ability to accurately diagnose the context, make correct decisions regarding what to do. And this is an essential competency for any person who's in a matrix of leadership with a team. So the first task of a leader, again, is to paint an accurate picture of reality, and that requires CQ, that requires contextual intelligence. I'll give you a couple examples to close this. First thing President George Washington did was he went and took a trip through all the what was then 13 states. He wanted to contextualize in his mind the new nation, right? But he didn't go around like some royal procession, and he didn't stay in all the really nice places. But he sheltered in normal spaces where every traveler would go. And so now you've got this signage, George Washington stayed here all over the place. And he was kind of tracking the context, mapping it out, understanding it, right? In the normal spaces, going across what was then this kind of fledgling country and really getting his head around it. Madam C.J. Walker is an early entrepreneur and one of the first black female millionaires, right? And so she has quite a story. She was orphaned at age 8. She was married at 14, widowed at 20. She was a single mother, so she's working for $1.50 a day as a washwoman, and that caused her hair, because of the harsh chemicals she was working with, to kind of fall out, have problems. So she developed the hair growing product and became the largest black owned business of her day. And she had contextual intelligence, right? She took her own struggle and the reality of what a washwoman was in the economic and sociological system that she inhabited. And she figured out, hey, if I have this pain point in my life, or if I have this thing, other people are going to need that. She developed something to help that, and also to lift herself out of that poverty. Many of you are probably familiar with Louis Pasteur, who was a French kind of inventor. And he used to do these on-site laboratories at the scene of major problems, that through experimentation he would develop solutions. So he developed the pasteurization process, right? You may have heard of, for like grape juice, wine, things like that. There was an outbreak of sheep and cattle getting sick. He went out, established a laboratory on the scene of the context, studied it from within, found out how to prevent that, found some way to save the silk industry. But his key thing, he wasn't back in the ivory tower, make formulating theories and all of that. He went into the trenches of the modern problem and he was reading the signs from within. So one of the movements we're going to look at in the contextual intelligence framework is immersion, immersing ourselves in the context from within, understanding it. And that's a key part of us, this contextual intelligence framework. You may have heard of John Wesley Powell. He was kind of famous for predicting the Dust Bowl. No one really listened to him, but he was mapping out what he thought geologically and with the changing kind of atmospheric conditions that there was this thing that was coming. Um, and he did some other brilliant things, but he nobody listened to him. He got fired, even though he was right. He predicted the black duster, and he calculated you need 20 inches of rain to grow crops. So sometimes contextually intelligent people also get fired and cast out and told that they're crazy and that they're don't know what they're talking about. But it's this sensitivity to topography and weather and a commitment to the stewardship of the land. He partnered with native peoples to learn from indigenous wisdom. Bill Gates is on my list for somebody who is an contextually intelligent person. He famously predicted in this 2015 TED Talk, you can go back and look at it, a pandemic crisis. And that actually did happen, obviously. I think he's an Issacharian in many ways, and he's been on the front end of like predicting technology and seeing how wealth could be used to actually heal some of the problems in society. People don't listen sometimes to contextually intelligent people because they're just buying into the dominant narrative or whatever. We're going to root all of this in scripture, and Philippians 2 is going to be our framework for contextual intelligence. And right here in the mind of Christ, I'm going to go into this in depth in coming lectures, so I'm not going to do it right now. But what if the way and truth of life of Jesus, or what Paul calls the mind of Christ, is actually a framework or a pathway for how to think and how to live faithfully in an incarnational way? So we're going to explore Philippians 2, 1 through 11. It's kind of going to be our primary text for this whole exploration of contextual intelligence. Built into that Philippians 2 thing, there's a self-emptying kenosis, right? Who being in the very form of God did not grasp equality with God as something exploited, emptied himself, put on flesh, incarnation, lived among us, word moved to the neighborhood, minded the gaps, saw the suffering, saw the oppression of, in the words of Howard Thurman, the disinherited people with their backs against the wall. He immersed himself as one of those people, right? In the context, himself as a disinherited person, went through the tomb time, the pain, the cross, the suffering, the liminality. On the other side of that, there was resurrection, ascension, and ultimately a new creation that came out of that. So we're going to take that biblical framework and we're going to look at these movements of unlearning, right? Self-emptying, immersing ourselves in the context, putting on flesh in it, minding the gaps, the fullness of God's kingdom in our current reality, understanding that we're going to fail, that we're going to go through disorientation, we're going to have that hit the wall movement where the Spirit shows up. Anything we're doing that's like kingdom significance, we're going to have these challenges, and God just has to show up in His resurrected self and take us to the next thing. Discovery takes place as we go through this journey. We get new insights, new revelations that we can only get through this process of unlearning, emerging, minding gaps, and disorientation. And then embodiment, something gets created usually. Either that's a new us, a new you, a new ministry, a new fresh expression, a new worship experience, something. But through the contextual intelligence framework, usually something is created. The ultimate act of contextual intelligence and incarnation is the creation of a Christian community to be blessed, broken, given to the world that can heal the isolation and suffering in the world. So embodiment is the final thing, and we'll move to Ephesians 4 to understand what that looks like. But that's just an overview of the framework for now. In our next module, we're going to look at the biblical, theological, and even a little bit of the historical roots of this.